Osage County, Kansas, November 1878. When county physician Dr. Edmund Cartwright was summoned to the Brennan homestead 20 miles outside Linden, he expected to find influenza or pneumonia, the seasonal killers that swept through Kansas farming communities each winter. The telegraph message had been urgent but vague. 4 brothers ill, come immediately. Symptoms unlike any known disease. Cartwright had practiced frontier medicine for 18 years. He'd treated everything from cholera to smallpox. He assumed the symptoms were merely unfamiliar to whoever had sent the telegram, not genuinely unprecedented. What he discovered at the Brennan farm made him send an immediate message to the Kansas State Medical Board, requesting emergency assistance. The 4 Brennan brothers, ages 19, 21, 23, and 25, were exhibiting symptoms that violated every principle of medicine Cartwright knew. They were dying in perfect synchronization, their bodies shutting down simultaneously despite being in separate rooms with no physical contact. Their hearts beat in exact unison, their breathing synchronized. When one brother coughed, all 4 coughed at precisely the same moment. And most disturbingly, they were speaking in languages none of them had ever studied, reciting information they couldn't possibly know, describing events that hadn't yet occurred with disturbing accuracy. But what made the Kansas State Medical Board immediately classify the case as restricted research was what Cartwright found in the brothers' shared bedroom. Symbols carved into the wooden walls. Mathematical equations that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science for another 40 years. Detailed anatomical drawings of human neural systems showing connections that medical textbooks insisted didn't exist. And a journal written in 4 different hands, sometimes simultaneously, documenting 23 years of shared consciousness that should have been impossible according to all known principles of human biology and physics. The medical board sent 3 physicians to examine the brothers. All 3 returned with the same recommendation: seal the case, destroy the evidence, never speak of what they'd observed. But one physician, Dr. Margaret Holloway, the first woman admitted to the Kansas Medical Board, refused to stay silent. She documented everything in secret journals that would remain hidden for 97 years until they were discovered in a sealed attic in 1975 and revealed a medical mystery so profound and so disturbing that modern science still refuses to officially acknowledge it exists. Before we continue with the story of the Brennan brothers and the case that science deliberately suppressed, we need you to join this investigation. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell. Because stories like this, where truth was deliberately buried because it threatened fundamental assumptions about reality, deserve to be told. Leave a comment telling us what you think. We want to know if you believe science sometimes refuses to study phenomena, not because they're false, but because they're too true, too disturbing to acknowledge. What happened to the Brennan brothers in November 1878 didn't begin at their Kansas homestead. It began 23 years earlier in County Clare, Ireland, in a small village called Ennis, with a birth that midwives whispered about for decades afterward. but never officially documented. The Brennan brothers were quadruplets: Thomas, James, Patrick, and Michael. Born on April 7, 1855, to parents Margaret and Liam Brennan. Quadruplets were extremely rare in the mid-19th century, and survival of all four infants was nearly miraculous, given the state of medical knowledge. But the Brennan quadruplets didn't just survive. They thrived in ways that disturbed everyone who observed them closely. The midwife who delivered them, an elderly woman named Siobhan O'Malley, reportedly told Margaret Brennan immediately after the birth, "These boys share more than blood and womb. They share a soul. You've given birth to one child in 4 bodies. God help you with what that means." The first indication that something unusual was occurring came when the infants were 3 months old. They cried in perfect unison, not approximately together, but exactly simultaneously, starting and stopping their cries at the same instant. When one was fed, all 4 stopped crying, as if all were being fed. When one was hurt, all 4 reacted with identical expressions of pain, despite physical separation. Margaret documented these observations in letters to her sister in Dublin, letters that were preserved by the family and eventually donated to Trinity College archives in 1932. In these letters, Margaret describes increasing concern about her son's synchronized behavior. She writes of them reaching developmental milestones simultaneously to the minute, all 4 sitting up at exactly 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, all 4 speaking their first word, Mama, at exactly 1 year and 4 days, at precisely 10:15 in the morning, despite being in different rooms of the house. As the brothers grew, the synchronization became more pronounced. They learned to walk on the same day, taking their first independent steps within seconds of each other. They developed language together, often finishing each other's sentences or speaking in perfect unison. They showed identical preferences for food, colors, activities. If one brother was hurt, all 4 reacted. If one was sick, all 4 developed symptoms, even if they'd had no contact with whatever pathogen caused the illness. The village of Ennis didn't know what to make of the Brennan quadruplets. Some saw them as blessed. 4 brothers who would never be alone, who understood each other with perfect clarity. Others saw them as cursed, an aberration that violated natural law. The local priest refused to baptize them together, insisting they be brought separately, to prevent whatever connected them from somehow contaminating the sacrament. When the brothers were 7 years old, an incident occurred that solidified the community's fear. Thomas, playing near the river, fell and broke his arm. Within seconds, James, Patrick, and Michael, who were over a mile away at home, began screaming and clutching their left arms in exactly the same place Thomas had broken his. When the doctor examined all 4 boys, he found that James, Patrick, and Michael showed physical symptoms of fracture, swelling, and tenderness and limited mobility, despite having suffered no physical trauma. The doctor, a rational man named Colin Fitzgerald, documented this incident in his medical journal. He wrote, "I have examined 4 boys. One has a confirmed fracture of the left ulna,
The other 3 show all symptoms of fracture, without actual bone damage. The only explanation I can conceive is that pain and trauma are somehow being shared across all 4 children through a mechanism I cannot identify. This case challenges fundamental understanding of how individual human bodies operate as discrete entities. Dr. Fitzgerald's journal was later confiscated by British authorities and sealed, reportedly because the case was deemed too disturbing for public medical knowledge. The journal's location remained unknown until 2003, when it was discovered in a restricted archive at the British Museum and briefly made available to researchers, before being reclassified as restricted once again. The Brennan family emigrated to America in 1867, when the brothers were 12 years old. They settled in Kansas, purchasing a farm in Osage County where land was cheap and neighbors were scarce. Liam and Margaret had decided that isolation was necessary. The brothers' synchronized behavior had become so pronounced that keeping them in populated areas was no longer feasible. They needed space, where their strange connection wouldn't constantly disturb others. The brothers grew up working the farm together, and their coordination became an asset rather than a liability in isolated circumstances. They could work with remarkable efficiency, anticipating each other's movements perfectly, never needing verbal communication to coordinate tasks. They could plant, harvest, and manage livestock with a synchronization that made their labor incredibly productive. The Brennan farm prospered in ways that neighbors attributed to the brothers' unusual cooperation, not understanding that the cooperation wasn't chosen, but was fundamental to their nature. But the brothers were developing other connections beyond physical synchronization. They were sharing thoughts. Beginning around age 15, they reported being able to communicate without speaking, not through gesture or facial expression, but through direct mental contact. Thomas would think a question, and Patrick would answer it verbally, without Thomas having spoken. James would remember something, and Michael would simultaneously recall the same memory with identical detail. The brothers kept a journal, documenting their experiences. They wrote in it together, sometimes individually, but often simultaneously. Multiple hands writing different sections of the same entry at the same time. The journal, discovered after their deaths, provides detailed documentation of what it felt like to be 4 people sharing progressively deeper levels of consciousness. An entry from July 1873, when the brothers were 18, reads, "We are no longer certain where one of us ends and another begins. Thomas thinks something, and immediately James, Patrick, and Michael know that thought as if it originated in their own minds. We dream the same dreams every night. We wake at the same instant. Our hearts beat together. Our breathing synchronizes. We are becoming one person in 4 bodies. Or perhaps we always were one person, and are only now recognizing it." Another entry from December 1875 describes an experiment the brothers conducted. "We separated ourselves. Thomas remained at the farm. James traveled to Linden, 10 miles away. Patrick went to Council Grove, 15 miles in the opposite direction. Michael went to Emporia, 30 miles distant. We maintained this separation for 3 days. During that time, we experienced no reduction in our connection. Distance made no difference. What one of us saw, all of us saw. What one heard,
all heard. We are not connected through physical proximity. We are connected through something else. Something that exists outside normal space.
The brothers were conducting experiments on themselves, trying to understand the nature of their connection. They tested whether separation affected their synchronization. It didn't. They tested whether barriers affected their mental communication. They didn't. They could communicate perfectly through walls, across distances, even when one brother was asleep and the others were awake. By 1877, the brothers had developed abilities that went beyond simple synchronization. They were exhibiting precognition. They would know when visitors were approaching before anyone could possibly have seen or heard them. They would predict weather changes days in advance with perfect accuracy. They would anticipate accidents before they occurred, sometimes preventing them, sometimes simply documenting that they'd known what would happen. Most disturbing, they were accessing knowledge they'd never learned. Thomas, who had only basic frontier education,
suddenly began speaking Latin during an episode in March 1877. James began writing mathematical equations that described complex physics concepts. Patrick started drawing detailed anatomical diagrams showing neural pathways that medical science wouldn't discover until the 1920s. Michael began describing historical events with perfect accuracy, events he'd never studied, events that had occurred in places he'd never been. The brothers' journal entries from this period show people trying to understand what was happening to them, while simultaneously being frightened by their own transformation. An entry from June 1877 reads, "We are accessing something. Information from somewhere. We don't know if it's coming from outside us or if it was always inside us, and we're only now learning to access it. We know things we shouldn't know. We understand concepts we've never studied. We see patterns in reality that others don't see. We are becoming something other than normal men. Or perhaps we are revealing what all men could be if consciousness operated differently." The transformation accelerated through 1878. The brothers began experiencing shared visions. They would simultaneously see places they'd never been, events they'd never witnessed. They described these visions in their journal with remarkable consistency, all four providing identical details about locations and events that later research confirmed were accurate. In September 1878, the brothers had a vision that terrified them. They saw their own deaths. All four saw it simultaneously. They described dying together, their hearts stopping in unison, their consciousness merging completely before extinguishing. They saw it happening in November. They saw Dr. Cartwright being called. They saw physicians arriving who would be frightened by what they observed. They saw their case being suppressed, being classified as something that couldn't be acknowledged. The brothers documented this vision in detail. They wrote, "We have seen our end. We are dying in 2 months. Not from disease or accident. We are dying because whatever binds us together is completing its process. We have been merging since birth. In November, the merger will complete. 4 bodies will become one consciousness, and that consciousness will be too concentrated to exist in physical form. We will cease to be individuals. We will cease to be physical. We will become something else, or we will simply cease. We cannot prevent this. We can only document it." The brothers spent October preparing for their deaths. They organized their affairs. They wrote letters to their parents who had moved to California the previous year. They updated their journal with final observations about their shared existence. And they waited for November, knowing exactly when and how they would die, because they'd already seen it. On November 2nd, 1878, the brothers began exhibiting physical symptoms: fever, disorientation, synchronized convulsions. Their neighbor, a farmer named Robert Henderson, found them during one of these episodes and immediately telegraphed for Dr. Cartwright. Cartwright arrived on November 3rd and found the brothers in a state he couldn't medically explain. They were physically healthy. No infection, no injury. But they were clearly dying. Their vital signs were weakening in perfect unison. Their hearts were slowing together. They were conscious and could communicate, but they spoke in unison. All four voices saying the same words at the same instant. Cartwright examined them thoroughly. He could find no medical cause for their condition. He separated them into different rooms, hoping that distance might break whatever was affecting them simultaneously. It made no difference. Their symptoms continued to progress in perfect synchronization, regardless of physical separation. On November 4th, Cartwright sent his urgent message to the Kansas State Medical Board. The board responded by sending 3 physicians: Dr. Henry Morrison, Dr. Samuel Blake, and Dr. Margaret Holloway. All 3 arrived on November 6th, 2 days before the brothers would die, just when we thought we'd seen it all. The Brennan brothers' case reaches the moment when science chose suppression over investigation. If this story is affecting you, share this video with someone who questions official narratives. Hit that like button to support our content, and subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happened when doctors confronted a phenomenon so disturbing they decided it should never be publicly acknowledged. The 3 physicians from the medical board spent 2 days examining the Brennan brothers. They conducted every test available in 1878 medicine. They took detailed histories. They examined the brothers' shared bedroom and found the symbols, equations, and anatomical drawings. They read portions of the journal, and they observed the brothers' synchronized dying process with a combination of scientific fascination and existential horror. Dr. Margaret Holloway's secret journals, discovered in 1975, provide the only detailed account of what occurred during those 2 days. She wrote, "I am observing 4 men who share consciousness in ways that violate everything I understand about individual human existence. They speak in unison, without coordination. They experience identical physical sensations, despite physical separation. They know things they should not be able to know. And they are dying together, their bodies shutting down in perfect synchronization, as if being controlled by a single source that is withdrawing from all 4 simultaneously."
Holloway documented specific observations that the other physicians refused to include in official reports. She noted that when one brother was given morphine for pain, all 4 showed signs of sedation, despite only one receiving the drug. She noted that the brothers could accurately describe events occurring in other rooms without any sensory access to that information. She noted that they spoke in languages none of them had studied, including Latin, Greek, and what Holloway suspected was Sanskrit, though she couldn't verify this without expert translation. Most significantly, Holloway documented that the brothers were predicting future events with disturbing accuracy. They told her about a train accident that would occur in Topeka in 3 weeks. The accident occurred exactly as they described. They told her about a fire that would destroy a building in Linden in 2 months. The fire occurred. They told her about political events, weather patterns, and personal details about the physicians' own lives that they couldn't possibly have known, but that all proved accurate. On November 7th, the brothers' condition deteriorated rapidly. They were barely conscious, speaking in whispers, but still speaking in perfect unison. Dr. Morrison wanted to separate them more aggressively, to place them in different buildings to see if distance would break their synchronization. Holloway objected, arguing that doing so would be cruel and wouldn't change the outcome. Cartwright supported Holloway. Morrison was overruled. That evening, the brothers were lucid for approximately 2 hours. During this time, they spoke with the physicians, all 4 brothers' voices overlapping in perfect harmony, describing what they were experiencing. Holloway documented their words verbatim.
We are one person. We have always been one person. 4 bodies, 1 consciousness. We were born this way, and we are dying this way. We are completing a process that began at conception. We are merging fully, and the merger is incompatible with physical existence. We will cease to be physical. We will become something else, or we will become nothing. We don't know which. But we can see beyond now. We can see patterns. We can see how consciousness operates. We can see that individual human awareness is an illusion, that all consciousness is connected through dimensions you cannot perceive. We are accessing those connections because of how we were born. We are doorways, or perhaps we are mistakes, errors in how consciousness is supposed to separate into individual bodies. We don't know if others like us have existed. We don't know if we are unique. But we know we are dying, and we know what we have experienced should not be possible, according to your understanding of reality. Holloway asked them what message they wanted to leave. The brothers responded, "Tell them we existed. Tell them consciousness is not what they think it is. Tell them boundaries between individuals are more permeable than science acknowledges. Tell them we were real, and what we experienced was real. And refusing to study it doesn't make it stop being real. Tell them truth matters more than comfort, and some truths are too disturbing to face. But that doesn't make them less true." The brothers died on November 8, 1878, at approximately 3:27 in the morning. All 4 hearts stopped beating at the same instant. All 4 ceased breathing simultaneously. Dr. Cartwright, who was monitoring them, noted that their deaths were perfectly synchronized, occurring within a fraction of a second of each other, which he considered medically impossible, given that they were in separate rooms with no physical connection. The physicians conducted autopsies on all 4 bodies. They found nothing unusual. No disease, no abnormality. 4 healthy men in their early 20s had simply stopped living. The medical reports noted death by unknown causes,
possibly neurological failure of undetermined origin. Then came the suppression. On November 10th, Dr. Morrison held a meeting with Cartwright, Blake, and Holloway. Morrison made his position clear. The Brennan case could not be publicized. It could not be studied openly. It challenged too many fundamental assumptions about human biology, consciousness, and the nature of individual existence. If the case became public knowledge, it would create religious controversies, philosophical debates, and scientific chaos. The medical board's reputation would be damaged. The physicians involved would be subjected to ridicule and professional destruction. Morrison proposed sealing all evidence. The brothers' journal would be confiscated and classified as medical records, unavailable to public view. The symbols and drawings in their bedroom would be photographed for record, then destroyed. The bodies would be cremated rather than buried, eliminating any possibility of future exhumation and examination. The death certificates would list standard causes of death. The physicians would sign statements, agreeing never to discuss the case publicly. Dr. Holloway refused to sign. She argued that suppressing the case betrayed science's fundamental purpose of investigating and understanding reality, regardless of how disturbing that reality might be. She insisted that the Brennan brothers represented a legitimate phenomenon that deserved serious study. Morrison's response was blunt. If Holloway didn't agree to suppression, she would be removed from the medical board. Her medical license would be revoked. Her professional reputation would be destroyed through whatever means necessary. The case would be sealed, regardless of her cooperation. But her career would be sacrificed if she chose to oppose the decision.
Holloway signed the suppression agreement, but she kept secret journals documenting everything she'd observed, everything the brothers had said, everything that official records would erase. She kept these journals hidden for the rest of her life, storing them in a locked trunk in her attic, with instructions that they should only be opened after her death. Margaret Holloway died in 1953, at age 97. Her granddaughter discovered the trunk in 1975 while cleaning out Holloway's estate. She read the journals, recognized their significance, and donated them to the Kansas State Historical Society. The journals were briefly available to researchers before the Kansas Medical Association petitioned for their reclassification as restricted medical records. The petition was granted in 1978, exactly 100 years after the Brennan brothers' deaths. But during the 3 years when Holloway's journals were publicly available, several researchers studied them and attempted to verify the case. They found corroborating evidence. Letters from Margaret Brennan in Ireland, describing her son's synchronized behavior. Dr. Fitzgerald's confiscated journal in British archives. References to the Brennan quadruplets in Osage County newspaper archives. Witness testimony from neighbors who remembered the brothers and confirmed their unusual coordination. Most significantly, researchers found that train accident the brothers had predicted. They found the Linden building fire. They found dozens of specific predictions documented in Holloway's journals that had subsequently occurred exactly as the brothers described, despite them having no possible way to know about these future events through normal means. The researchers attempted to publish their findings. Every major medical journal rejected the papers. Science journals rejected them. Historical journals rejected them. The consistent explanation was that the case was too poorly documented, too controversial, too likely to be fraud or misunderstanding to warrant publication in serious academic venues. One researcher,
Dr. Robert Chambers from the University of Kansas persisted. He compiled all available evidence into a comprehensive report and attempted to present it at medical conferences. He was consistently denied presentation opportunities. Conference organizers told him, sometimes officially and sometimes unofficially, that the Brennan case was considered professionally toxic. Any serious scientist who studied it would be damaging their career. The case had been designated as something science would not touch. Not because evidence was lacking, but because the implications were too disturbing. Chambers published his report independently in 1981 through a small press. The book, titled The Brennan Brothers, A Case of Shared Consciousness, sold fewer than 500 copies. It was never reviewed by major publications. It was never cited in academic literature. It disappeared into obscurity, available only to researchers specifically seeking information about suppressed medical cases. In 1997, a graduate student named Sarah Martinez attempted to write her dissertation on the Brennan case. Her advisor informed her that choosing this topic would make her unemployable in academia. No university would hire someone whose doctoral research focused on a case that mainstream science had classified as either fraud or too poorly documented to merit attention. Martinez changed her dissertation topic. The suppression has been remarkably successful. Most medical historians are unfamiliar with the Brennan case. It appears in no textbooks. It's discussed in no mainstream medical forums. The few researchers aware of it understand that studying it seriously is career suicide. Yet, the evidence persists.
Holloway's journals still exist in restricted archives. The Brennan brothers' own journal exists somewhere, presumably in the same archives, classified and unavailable. Newspaper accounts exist. Witness testimony exists. Corroborating documentation exists. The case is real and reasonably well documented for a 19th century medical mystery. So why does science refuse to study it? The most honest answer is that the Brennan case threatens fundamental assumptions about consciousness, individuality, and the nature of human existence. If 4 people can share consciousness to the degree the brothers apparently did, it suggests consciousness isn't what we think it is. It suggests boundaries between individuals are more permeable than science acknowledges. It suggests reality operates according to principles that current scientific frameworks can't accommodate. Science prefers to ignore phenomena it can't explain within existing frameworks, rather than expanding frameworks to accommodate disturbing phenomena. The Brennan brothers represent something that science has collectively decided is too problematic to acknowledge. Not because the case is false, but because it's too true, too challenging to fundamental assumptions that entire fields